All right, so we are going to go build an application, and we're going to use AWS. So you will have to go create yourself an AWS account, attach a credit card. This isn't going to cost a lot. I'm going to be very careful about spend here. It will cost something, but I really don't want the cost to go over $10 for the entire month while we're doing all these labs collectively, like throughout the entire course. But the thing I have to tell you is why I chose AWS. So the reason I chose AWS is because it has this service called Cloud9, which is a cloud developer environment. A cloud developer environment is a developer environment running on the cloud. A very popular one is Gitpod, and I would have used Gitpod because I really like them. But the problem with Gitpod is that they use Docker as the way that they run their environment, and so they're using Docker with cgroups version 1, and in order to run Kubernetes on Docker, you need cgroups version 2. If you don't know what cgroups is, don't worry, it's covered in this course. We do have to learn it, but we could not use Gitpod, so we had to use a virtual machine. And we could have just launched any virtual machine up, right? We could have just went over to EC2 instances and launched one up, or Azure Virtual Machine. But the problem is that there is more work involved launching those clusters. Like you have to specify the drivers and the base image, and and you have to install Docker, and it became too complicated. And so Cloud9 just makes it really, really easy. For whatever reason, they just have all the stuff to make the cluster setup super easy. And so that's why we're going to use it, okay? So what I want you to do is go type in Cloud9 at the top here, and we will go over to Cloud9. We're going to create ourselves a new environment. I'm going to call this K8 ENV, and we'll say this environment will be used to run Minikube, kind, and to build our Docker application, okay? And so we'll go ahead and hit next steps. And for this, we'll create a new EC2 instance for direct access. That just means that when we launch this and it has a terminal, that terminal will be directly attached to the virtual machine. And so this will have a virtual machine attached to it, so we have to choose a size. Now remember, Minikube requires at least 2 gigabytes of memory, and just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go to a T3 medium. Notice that it is 4 gigabytes of RAM, so we'll do that. And we have some options here: Amazon Linux 2, Amazon Linux AMI, Ubuntu. And so Ubuntu is fine, but sometimes I run it with like sudo issues and other stuff. And so Amazon Linux 2, I would like to use it for everything, but we can't use it for micro K8s because we don't have Snap installed. So we're going to do Amazon Linux 2 for 2 of them, and then for Ubuntu, we'll have to set up a separate one. This will turn off after 30 minutes on use. So if you forget to turn off your environment, don't worry, it will take care of it for you. And so we'll go ahead and hit next step. And we'll go and create this environment. So if you've never calculated costs in AWS, we'll just go over EC2 pricing, just so you know what you are spending when you are doing this stuff. And we'll go over to on demand, and we'll look up a T3 medium. T2 probably costs the same thing, but I'm going to look for T3 here. So let's say T3 medium, and this is the hourly rate. And so the way I calculate anything is I take the cent amount, that's the hourly, and we go 730 because there's 730 hours generally in a month. And so that would cost us $30 if we ran this nonstop, which we're not, right? We're just going to use it when we need it. It's going to shut off when we don't need it, okay? So while that's spinning up, we're going to see Cloud9. You might have this dark mode or light mode, I don't know, but we'll give it a moment, and then we'll kind of just configure it so it's a bit nicer for us. Notice that the keyboard mode is Vim. You might be on default. I'm using Vim because I like that. Please stay on default. Vim is very difficult to use if you're not a Vim user. You can also change the look of it. So this is the classic dark theme. There's a new flat one that I kind of like. And so I want this to be dark. I just think it's nicer when it's dark. So I'm going to go to Preferences maybe, and there should be themes here. And if I drop down here, I can't seem to find it, but that's fine. So there's just one that's really, really nice that I like, and it is flat dark, but it's not letting me choose that for some reason here today, which is totally fine. So we'll just go back to, or maybe it's this one here. This one? We'll just stay on that. Okay, we're just fiddling too much. But we already have a virtual machine, so this is an EC2 instance. So if we go over to AWS again, just make sure you're logged in there, and we'll sign in here. We're going to go over to EC2, I just want to show you that there is a virtual machine running. Okay, so there it is. There's our virtual machine running. And the one thing that we didn't get to choose, usually when you launch an instance of virtual machine, you'll get to choose. So we'll say like Amazon Linux 2, we'll go to storage. We got to go next here. We usually get to choose the size, but it defaulted to 8 gigabytes, right? And that's not going to be enough space for our virtual machine. And by the way, AWS has like a new layout here. So this is like another way of creating a virtual machine. Very confusing. I don't like that they did that, but the problem is this virtual machine does not have enough storage on it. If we try to create our cluster, we're going to run out of space. But we'll worry about that later on. So I just wanted to point that out. But right now, all we care about is creating ourselves a new Docker image to work with. So what I'll do here is I'll go to the left-hand side and I'll create ourselves a new folder. And this is going to be our app. Okay. And in here, what we're going to do is create a Sinatra app. So I'm going to do Sinatra Docker. Okay. And there should be like a very easy tutorial for us to find here. Yeah, this one's fine. I just need the base code. I know how Sinatra works. If you don't know what Sinatra is a very, very simple web server for Ruby that's like this simple. And it's just going to be really easy for us to use, okay? So what we'll do here is we'll just go and copy this code here. So this will be the Sinatra app. So we will call this server.rb. Oops, that's a folder. We'll go ahead and delete that. But we will create a new file here. This will be server.rb. We will need a gem file. That's how we install our plugins, gem file. And then we need a config.ru. And I think that's everything. And so we'll go back over to here and we'll just start copying. So we'll go here and we'll grab the actual server code. They call theirs hello. I'm calling mine server just because we should really call it just server, you know? And it's not copying here. We'll try this one more time. I'll right click. Sometimes pasting is kind of a pain here. So we'll paste this again. There we go. And I'm just going to say hello world. And that's not hello RB. We'll just take that out of there. We will need our gem file. So if we go back to this little project here, this is all we need. We just need to specify a source. We also need to choose a default web server. So we're going to choose WebBrick for that. I know that they left that out of that tutorial, or it's just an old tutorial. Config.ru, that is for using rack. It's a way, it's like a lightweight interface for servers. It's not that important to know. You just need to know that you need it. So we'll include that as well. And that looks pretty fine. And then we just need the Dockerfile. So that's what we're missing here. So we'll say new file, Dockerfile. And then we'll just copy the contents here. Actually, I'll take the simpler one here. I don't need all the documentation. Okay, we'll paste that in there. This is using Ruby 2.7.4. So the great thing about Cloud9's Amazon Linux is that it comes installed with a lot of stuff. So if I type in Ruby-V, it comes with a version 2.6.3. Right now, the latest version of Ruby is probably like 3.0 or something. So I go to Ruby here, and we go here. We can see the latest version is 3.1. So just to be safe, I'm going to update to the latest one. RVM, Ruby Version Manager, is a way of installing multiple versions of Ruby. If I do RVM list, this is the version installed. So I'm going to go RVM install 3.1.0. This might complain. And the reason why is because it doesn't know that it's up to date. So I'm going to type in RVM update, which is not the command, but I wanted to get the actual command we have to type, which is RVM get head. And that's just going to tell it to look at the latest versions of Ruby. So now if I do RVM install 3.1.0, it'll install that. And I just realized my text is really small, so I'm going to bump that up for you, okay? So we'll go over here, and I will try to find that font while it is installing. Maybe user settings. Terminal. Okay, so terminal, we can bump up the font here. Okay, code editor. Is the font okay? Yeah, it's fine, but I think we can make it a little bit bigger. This is terminal, code editor. Here we go. Okay, that's better. All right, sorry about that. I don't think there's much I can do about these. There might be something to bump that up, but I'm not sure. So Ruby 3.1.0 takes a little bit of time to install. So we will have to wait a little bit here, but let's just take a look at the Docker file if you've never done Docker before. You really kind of need to know a bit about Docker to work with Kubernetes, because a lot of times you are packaging images to be used with Kubernetes, and Docker is the most common one here. But here we have the Ruby version. So this is referencing a base image from Docker Hub. So if I was to go and type in Docker Hub Ruby, okay, this is what it's referencing. By default, it's going to pull from here, and it's pulling from this here, this 3.1.0. Okay, so if I click into here, it'll actually show you the content. So this is the way they are setting up Ruby for that image. And then notice that it extends from Bullseye. So you can keep going down the rabbit hole. But basically, this is just a fancy bash script for installing stuff and then packaging it into a container, okay? But we'll go back over to Cloud9. It is still installing. What it's going to do is say, look at the working directory and take all of the code. So, and then it's going to copy the code into that folder. So create a new folder on the Docker image called code, and then copy the contents here, all of these files into that directory. And then do a bundle install. So whatever's in the gem file, install those bundles and expose on port 4567. We can make this whatever port we want, 3000. I'm going to leave it as 4567. And then when the Docker image is invoked, like it's told to execute or run, it's going to run this command first: bundle exec rack up. So that runs rack host bind on 0.0.0.0. That means to anywhere in the world. You always need to bind to 0.0.0.0. Very common for web apps. And then it's going to listen, or it's going to run on port 4567. So we're saying expose 4567 so that that port is open for the Docker instance, and then being able to access that, okay? So we will have to wait for this to finish installing, and I'll see you back here in a moment, okay? All right, so after a short little wait there, it looks like our Ruby version is installed. So what I'm going to do is type in rvm list. That's going to show us the versions there. And notice this is the current version up here. Oh, sorry, it is set to this current one, but I'm just going to say rvm use 3.1.0 just in case, and say rvm default. I think it's use 3.1.0 default. I can't remember what it is. That's okay. We don't have to default it. But now we have the right version of Ruby installed. So now I'm going to cd into that app directory, and we're going to do bundle install, because we want to make sure that this works before we turn it into a Docker image or file, right? So now that that is ran, we can just start it by typing bundle exec ruby server.rb. So bundle exec means do this in the context of what's installed in the Docker file, Ruby to execute the Ruby file, server.rb, and we'll hit enter and we'll see what comes out. So it looks like it's running. I'm just going to close that tab there. And if we want to quickly test now, we could open up a port to see if it's working, but I'm going to open up a new terminal. And what I'm going to do is type in curl localhost 4567. And it says connection refused. So I'm just going to check to see what port it actually started up. It actually started on port 8080. Okay, so if we go back here and do port 8080, there it is, hello world. And that's totally fine because when it actually launches, we've actually told it to start on port 4567. Okay, but by default, it's starting on port 80. But notice when we did a curl, we got hello world. So it's really copying the contents of what was being served, which is HTML, right? So it's just a plain text string called hello world. So that means this is ready to turn into a Docker image. So Docker actually comes pre-installed on Amazon Linux 2 for Cloud9, not Amazon Linux 2 itself, but the version that is being used with Cloud9. And so I can just type in docker build -t Sinatra sample. And I think that's how we specify the name. I don't do this every day. So yeah, there we go. And that would tag it. So Sinatra sample, and we'll hit enter, and that should create ourselves a Docker image. So it's just downloading stuff and building it. Okay, this usually doesn't take too long because we're really not making so much here. But once that is done, we will be able to go and do like Docker images. So I'm just going to type Docker images for the time being, see what comes up. And so notice that we already actually have some pre-installed like Python, Node.js, and stuff like that. And this finished off. So failed to register layer, no space left on the device. So we forgot to resize our drive. So if we type in df, H stands for human. DF is like disk something. I can't remember what it stands for. DF is for report file from system disk. So I don't know the name, I don't know what DF stands for, but it's going to tell us about the disk. So if we type in DF, this shows mounted volume. So this is where our storage is. And one of these is our primary volume. And so I can't make sense of this. So what I always do is I type in -h, which means human, show it in human display. And so here we see 10 gigabytes, and then we have 9.0 gigabytes used, and this is all that's available. So based on looking at this, this is the biggest volume here. We know that this came with like an 8 gigabyte or 10 gigabyte drive volume. And so this must be the one that we are using. It's already filled up because Docker can fill up drives pretty darn fast. So what we'll need to do is make our way over to EC2. Okay, and if you're not there, we'll just click on AWS logo here at the top, type in EC2, we'll go over here, and we'll just close that, and we'll look for instance. If you expand the name, we should be able to see K8's Cloud9, that's the one there. We'll checkbox it, go over to storage, drag up, go over to the volume, and we can see what size it is. Click into the volume again, maybe, and this has 10 gigabytes. So that sounds right based on what we're looking at. So this is where we're going to go ahead and modify this. Now, if we were on the free tier of AWS, which we'd have to be using a T2 Micro, which we totally can't, there is a limit of like 30 gigabytes to stay in the free tier, but we're already out of the free tier, so, and we're not going to keep this around for long, so it doesn't matter. So just make it 40 gigabytes. I know that Minikube said 20 gigabytes, but 40 gigabytes because we're going to be running more than just Minikube on it, okay? So we'll go ahead and modify that, and we'll click that. Now, AWS should automatically expand it. Sometimes you have to do some weird Linux commands to do it or reboot the server, but elastic scaling should just happen, like elastic volumes is something that works with AWS supported images. And so we're going to go here and just refresh until it's been modified. I'm just watching it here. This is probably the drive. Yeah, here's the new one, 40 gigabytes. And so I'm just waiting for it to do something. So it's just optimizing. I don't know if we have to wait for it to optimize. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over back over here. I'm going to hit up, and notice that it still says 10 gigabytes. So sometimes I'll do this and it will show up, and sometimes it requires a reboot. I'm not sure if it's because it has to finish optimizing. And I don't know how long it's going to take to optimize. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to EC2, our instances, and we're just going to reboot it. You don't want to terminate it. That would lose all of our work. We can stop this instance and we will not lose our work. We can reboot this instance and we'll not lose our work, but we'll go ahead and reboot. Sometimes reboot will take down Cloud9, but see how it's reconnecting, but because reboots are so fast, it should reconnect without us having to close this and reopen it, okay? So we'll just give it a moment to do that. We'll go back over here. Now, if it still says reconnecting, okay, it reconnected, we're fine. Okay, so sometimes if it takes too long, I'll close it and reopen it. I'm gonna close these things here. And so now if we hit up, we can see we're 40 gigabytes. So we should be fine to go and build that Docker image. So we'll go ahead here and hit that again. Unable to prepare context, unable to evaluate symlink in Dockerfile. No such file or directory. It's because we're not in the right directory. When we restart it, it put us back to the root folder there. So we'll type that in and we'll hit up and we'll let it go again. And so these were already downloaded. So I guess it downloaded again, but sometimes it doesn't have to download twice. But we'll just give it a moment here. So we'll just go over to here, type in Docker images. Notice that Ruby's been downloaded. It says 2.7.4. Maybe that was already there because ours is 3.1.0 up here. Did we save this file? I'm not sure if we saved it. So if it wasn't saved, we'll just have to do this one more time. Yeah, so I think that was the problem there. So if I hit up Docker images, notice like the sizes are showing up here. So we might not want to have this image. Let's see, Docker remove Ruby 2.7.4. I don't use Docker on a regular basis, but I'm just trying to remember how to do it. There we go. And so if I hit up here, just because these are all taking up space, right? And so, yeah, 2.7.4 is gone, and now there's the 3.10. We'll go back here. This has been successfully tagged. And so this Docker image, if we go back over here, is right here, right? It's somewhere on the machine. But we need to actually now put this into some kind of repository so we can use it. And there are things like Docker Hub and other things like that, but we're going to use AWS's solution because it's very cost effective, and we're already using AWS, so why not? So I'm going to go back to awsamazon.com. We'll sign in here, so I just have another tab. I'm already signed in, but it's just how their homepage works. At the top here, I'm going to type in ECR. And so ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry. That's a place that it's like a Git repository specifically for Docker images. We're going to go ahead and hit Getting Started. We want this to be a public repository just to save us a lot of trouble. We'll call this Sinatra example. And notice we can upload this stuff. So we'll say this is for Linux. Now this will be public facing, so people will know where this is. Generally don't share that out because you don't want to be paying for traffic going out of AWS, because that's something AWS will charge you for. But for our purposes, no one's going to know what our URL is, so it's totally fine. And we're going to go ahead and create ourselves a new repository. And it creates it pretty quick, almost instant. And then we click into the Sinatra example. And up here we have the view push command. So these are the things that we will have to run in order to push it. Now, when we use Cloud9, this already has our AWS credentials built in. If you're doing this on your own machine, you'd have to install the AWS CLI, and it's a big pain in the butt. But with Cloud9, it's already directly integrated with AWS credentials. So it's going to be super easy. So I just copy this line here. Okay, and what that does is it gets our login password and stores some information for ECR, okay? So we'll go ahead and hit enter. So it has stored credentials. So notice here it says your password will be stored unencrypted in this config.json. So it's storing temporary credentials here for us to use ECR. I don't think they're long-lived. Well, I guess they're long-lived because they're living on the machine. Then we do our Docker build. That's what we already did. And then here, after the build complete, tag your image so you can push the repository. So we copy that. We go back here and paste it. No such image Sinatra example. So maybe I did not spell it the same way here. So if we go back and type Docker images, and we'll just scroll up here. So is this spelled the same way? That's all I can think of that's wrong. Sinatra example. So Sinatra sample. Oh, okay. So what I'm going to do, because that's a bit silly, I'm going to just go ahead and delete this one. We'll say Docker remove image Sinatra sample. Or sorry, it's image remove, I think. Okay, and we go back to Docker images, and we can see it's been removed, and we'll go back over here, and this time we'll do example. And actually, just to do a sanity check, we'll actually just copy what's over here to save us some trouble. Okay, we'll paste that in there. And this will be a lot faster because it already has the Ruby 3.10 image, so it built a lot faster. We'll go back over here. We'll hit up to Docker images. You can see that it's there with the proper name. And we'll just hit up until we get back to this tag. So we're going to tag it. Great. And we'll go back over to ECR, and we will go grab our next line, and this will push it. All right. And so what it's doing is it's actually pushing it over here. So if we go back and refresh, we're going to wait till it shows up here. Go back here and watch it as well. It shouldn't take too long. And it's pushing all, I think, the layers. So like each one of these lines runs as a layer. So that's all the layers that it's pushing. And there's obviously layers within layers when we look in the base image there as well. But it's almost done. You can see it's a little bit bigger than I'd like it to be, but that's what it has to be. And it's pushed. So we go back here, we give it a refresh. There it is. So it's 361 megabytes. So it's a little bit big. We click into this here. Nothing super exciting. You know, it just shows that it's there. But now we have our Docker application that we are going to run in Kubernetes. Okay, so we can go, we'll leave this tab open. We'll go back here and we'll start installing Minikube.